Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. Israel aims to increasingly intensify its renewed offensive operation in the Gaza Strip until the Islamist Hamas releases the hostages. The Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, pledges to persist hostilities against the State of Israel. The United States reiterates that while it rather pursue a diplomatic solution, it will thwart Iran's quest for nuclear weapon capabilities, including by launching a war. Israel will increasingly intensify its renewed offensive operations in the Gaza Strip until the Islamist Hamas releases the hostages. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz released a statement in which he highlighted Jerusalem's instruction to the IDF to begin seizing territories in the Gaza Strip while evacuating the population and to expand a security zone around Enclave in order to protect Israeli communities and IDF soldiers. Defense Minister Katz went on to underscore that Israel remains committed to the proposals relayed to the Palestinian terror group by the U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff, while underscoring that so long as Hamas continued to refuse the proposals, the more territory it will lose to Israel. The Israeli defense minister concluded his statement by underscoring that Israel will intensify the fighting with strikes from the air, sea, and land, and by expanding the ground maneuver until the hostages are released and Hamas is defeated, while using all military and civilian means of pressure, including evacuating the Gaza population to the south and implementing U.S. President Donald Trump's voluntary transfer plan for the residents of Gaza. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stressed last night that the president made it very clear to Hamas that if they do not release all the hostages, there would be all hell to pay. Unfortunately, she noted, Hamas chose to play games in the media with lives. Leavitt continued by highlighting that President Trump fully supports Israel and the IDF and the actions that they have taken in recent days. Meanwhile, at the UN headquarters in New York, the world body's Security Council held a session, during the course of which the UN Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Khaled Hiyari, provided a briefing on the humanitarian conditions of Israeli hostages held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
The ceasefire and hostages release deal that took effect on 19 January offered a glimmer of hope and respite by reuniting 25 Israeli hostages with their loved ones and returning the remains of 8 deceased hostages who were killed on 7th of October or while in captivity to their families. Their release and return were sadly also a moment of great anxiety, as most of the living hostages were paraded in front of crowds, and the coffins of the deceased, including those of 2 young children who were killed in captivity, were displayed publicly by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups during appalling ceremonies that violated international law.
Hiyari continued by calling for the immediate release of all hostages from Hamas captivity.
The hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. Until their release, they must be allowed to receive visits and support from the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they must be treated with dignity and respect in line with humanitarian principles.
The Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East went on to raise the alarm over prospects that the Islamist Hamas would harm the hostages amid renewed hostilities.
The resumed hostilities in Gaza, compounded with the lack of access and rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation, are exposing the remaining hostages to constant danger and life-threatening conditions.
Also addressing the UN Security Council was Eli Sharabi, an Israeli civilian who was recently released after 491 days in Hamas captivity.
For 491 days, I held on to hope. I imagined a life we would rebuild. I dreamed of seeing my family again. Only when I returned home, I learned the truth. My wife and my daughters had been slaughtered by Hamas terrorists on October 7.
Sharabi continued by highlighting his struggle with hunger during Hamas captivity.
I cannot begin to describe the agony. It was hell. I was fed a piece of pita a day, maybe a sip of tea. Hunger consumed everything. They beat me. They broke my ribs. I didn't care. I just wanted a piece of bread.
While the hostages were starving, Sharabi revealed that the Islamist Hamas terror operatives were feasting with meals provided by the UN-delivered humanitarian aid.
They would eat many meals a day from the UN aid in front of us, and we never received any of it. When you speak of humanitarian aid, remember this. Hamas eats like kings, while hostages starve.
Returning to the Middle East, where the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, launched yet again another ballistic missile in the direction of the State of Israel, prompting rocket alert sirens to sound throughout multiple locations, to include Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, as well as their surrounding areas. According to the IDF spokesperson's unit, the missile that was launched from Yemen was intercepted by the Israel Air Force prior to crossing into Israeli territory, causing no injuries or damage. Meanwhile, Houthi spokesman Yahya Sarriah proclaimed that the Iranian-backed terror group would continue to launch attacks against Israel, irrespective of the ongoing military campaign by the United States against the Houthis in Yemen. Meanwhile, in Tehran, the Islamic Republic's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei responded to U.S. President Donald Trump's warning that unless Iran holds its support for the Houthis, it would pay the price.
آمریکایی‌ها بدانند که در مواجهه با ایران هرگز با تهدید به جایی نخواهند رسید. تهدید میکنن بدانن ما هیچ وقت شروع کننده برخورد به درگیری با این و اون نبودیم، اما اگر چنانچه کسی خباثت کنه و شروع کنه بدانه که سیلی‌های سختی خواهد خورد.
Following his bold and defiant remarks, Ayatollah Khamenei ironically sought to distance Iran from Houthi actions, irrespective of Western intelligence agencies proving to the contrary.
یک اشتباه بزرگی رو سیاستمداران آمریکایی و اروپایی و امثال اینها میکنن و اون این که مراکز مقاومت در منطقه رو اسمش میگذارن نیروهای نیابتی ایران. با اونا اهانت میکنن. نیابتی یعنی چه؟ ملت یمن انگیزه داره. مقاومت ها، مراکز مقاومت در کشورهای منطقه انگیزه دارن. ایران جمهوری اسلامی نایب لازم نداره.
The Ayatollah regime's supreme leader went on to pledge to his followers that ultimately the Iran-led axis would prevail despite successive defeats in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and expectedly soon in Yemen and Iraq as well.
شک نکنید سرانجام این ایستادگی ها شکست دشمنانه، شکست رژیم خبیث فاسق صهیونیستی است.
It is worth noting that following President Trump's statement demanding Iran end its support for the Houthis, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stressed in a phone conversation with the Hugh Levitt show that Iran is going to be held responsible for any assistance they continue to provide to the Houthis.
The president's been clear. Iran is going to be held responsible for any assistance they continue to provide the Houthis. The president had a post earlier this morning where he outlined that Iran is still helping the Houthis, maybe not as openly, maybe not as much as they were in the past, but they're openly helping them.
Washington's top diplomat continued by addressing Iran's nuclear program, which is rapidly approaching levels of weaponization.
He's prepared to do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. He's been abundantly clear. Now, he's a president that wants to promote peace. If you asked him, he would tell you he would much prefer to work this out diplomatically without a war, and that's his preference. That will always be his preference. But if you force him to choose between a nuclear Iran or taking action, the president's been clear he will take action.
Secretary Rubio went on to warn that if the Islamic Republic continues to reject diplomacy, an American attack against Iran will not limit its strikes against its nuclear infrastructure, but it would also target the Ayatollah regime proper. Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. TV7 Israel is a non-profit ministry with all of our productions exclusively reliant on your generosity. Therefore, if you're blessed by the content of our programs and would like to encourage you, support TV7 Israel with a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd like to encourage you as ever, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. Jonathan Hessen wishing you a Shabbat Shalom u'Mevorach, and God willing, we'll see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.